Hello, the latest edition of War Games Illustrated arrived this week, and I was having a look through it and came across this double-page advertisement for North Star Games. And I'm very familiar with North Star, I buy a lot of their figures and products. And I nearly skipped past this page because I thought I knew everything on it, but then my eye was drawn to this. It's a samurai skirmish game called Daisho, and I almost mistook it for another game that North Star market called Ronin. This is Ronin here, which again is a skirmish war game. And a part of the reason I nearly mistook it for the same game is that all these figures are box sets marketed by North Star that are Ronin compatible, as it were. They're sold in groups known as Buntai, and the figures make up a suitable Buntai for the game of Ronin. So I was a little bit kind of bewildered, wondering, well, why, even on the front cover of the rule set of Daisho, they're showing the same range of figures. I wondered what it was all about. My interest was sparked, and I thought I'd get hold of Daisho because I enjoy Ronin a lot and see what it was all about. So here it is. It arrived through the post really quickly. Only took a couple of days from ordering it for me to receive it through the letterbox. Now, it's a fantastic production. It costs £14.95, and the thing you don't realise from this advert is that it's much bigger than the Osprey sets of rules. This is Ronin as a comparison, but it still has got me slightly puzzled because, as you can see, the figures on it are indeed the North Star range that were produced for Ronin. And when you look inside, nearly all the pictures are of the Ronin models. Some aren't, but the thing that you really have to be impressed by is some of the photographs are just magnificent. There are some full page shots. Look at that. Absolutely gorgeous, absolutely fantastic. And there's quite a few of those, so there's a great deal of eye candy in the book, which I like immediately. There's another one. But they're all the Ronin range. So what's going on, I wondered. Is it a supplement of some kind to Ronin? What's the aim, and why isn't it produced by Osprey, but they're using the official Ronin rules, official Ronin figures? Okay, well, the opinion I've come to is that Osprey didn't have room for another samurai skirmish game. They've already got Ronin. It's a really good game. It's got a very interesting, innovative device where you have a number of combat points, and they can either be attack or defence points, and you can seal the proportion of each that you're going to play in a particular melee, so that your enemy, your opponent, doesn't know whether you're going to be defensive or offensive during the melee, and it works really well. But the guy who wrote it, Craig Woodfield, who wrote Ronin, this sort of rules here, originally devised this mechanism for a Roman gladiatorial game, not for a samurai skirmish game. And Osprey told him that there were already too many gladiator-style games on the market, so he tweaked it because he's also got an interest in martial arts and Japanese history. He tweaked it so that it fitted in with Osprey's marketing research. And at the same time, the guys that have written this, they call themselves the Ministry of Gentlemanly Warfare, but they're two people called Charles Merton and Craig Cartmel. They write rules for Osprey. They've got a very successful set of rules called In Her Majesty's Name, which is a kind of Victorian steampunk sort of game. I've never played it, but I know people who have and have enjoyed it. It's not my kind of cup of tea. I'm already kind of up to my eyes in different rules and periods and so on, and I just can't accommodate anymore. But I was certainly interested in this because I play Ronin. I've got quite a few figures for it, and it looks like they're going to fit naturally into this game, Daisho. So my feeling is that the market is already saturated as far as Osprey were concerned with samurai skirmish games, and they didn't want another, but these guys at the Ministry of Gentlemanly Warfare were really keen to write a set of rules. So they've gone off on a tangent, as it were. This set of rules is printed in Lithuania, of all places, and they have got permission from North Star and from Osprey to mention Ronin and to use a lot of their pictures. There are some other pictures in the book which aren't. I mean, I think these figures are Dixon. They certainly look like Dixon to me. That's lovely. I don't know who produces that, but it's a very nice model. They're North Star. I was trying to find one. There's one in here, at least. This one here is a ninja figure that's produced by Perry. So they've got a wide range of figures and buildings and so on in here, not just Osprey-related products. So the big question really is, how is it different from Ronin? At first glance, it appears to be very similar. It's a game that's played on a small table. They recommend 3-foot square table. It uses between 5 and 15 figures a side. So at first glance, it looks very similar to Ronin. The way they've made a difference is that they call it Skirmish Warfare in Mythical Japan, whereas Ronin is described as skirmish war games in the age of samurai. So Ronin has a more historical feel to it. It purports to be more historically accurate, whereas this is beginning to venture into the realms of mythology, mythical Japanese creatures and so on. And that's interesting because Ronin have a website which was set up a couple of years ago, which has a forum on it, and it purports to be the official Ronin website, even though it's not hasn't been developed by the author Craig Woodfield. But on that there's a forum that you can join, and you can get, Craig will occasionally submit kind of answers and so on this forum, so it's useful as a way of learning the rules, getting answers to questions, displaying FAQs and errata, that kind of thing, giving you a few ideas about different scenarios you can develop and so on. But the official website for Ronin is on the Osprey Wargames website, and on that you can download roster sheets, that kind of thing. It's got the errata on there, but it's also now got various suggestions for how to play mythical creatures. So there was clearly a desire on some people's parts to introduce mythical creatures into the game. And there is already out there a very similar idea produced by a company called Zenit. It's a game called Kenzai. Zenit are a Spanish company, but these figures are sold through Wayland Games. And Kenzai is essentially what Daisho is attempting to do as well. I haven't got a great many Kenzai figures, and as you can see I haven't got many of them out of the box yet. I started painting them. But Kenzai is a mixture of traditional sort of samurai figures. You get characters such as spies, assassins, Kenzai, but you also get the typical samurai, Ronin and Ashigaru type figures. But you also can get a wealth of mythical creatures. These guys are bird-like creatures called Tengu. This one is an Oni, which is a hell creature. But they're all, how can I put it? They're all genuine Japanese mythological creatures. They haven't been made up by the creator of Kenzai. These are figures that if you were Oriental, you would recognise them just as we would recognise elves and dwarves and goblins and so on. So it's these type of creatures that the authors are trying to introduce into this set of rules, and that is really the big difference between this and Ronin. Now, I have had a quick look through the rules, and I'm going to have a go at playing a little solo war game with about 5 figures a side. And I won't film the entirety of that, but I'll give you a kind of battle report on that later. But having read through it, I'm really excited by this set of rules. One of the things I don't like about Ronin really is that it's a very kind of perfunctory set of rules. There's not really anywhere to go with it. Once you've played it a couple of times, it can sort of get a little bit tedious, really. That's my feeling. I'm not knocking it. It's a fantastic game, but I don't think it's really going anywhere. Whereas with this, the game mechanism is supposed to be very similar to the game. The way the game plays is supposed to be very similar to In Her Majesty's Name. So if you're familiar with that, you'll probably be able to pick this up more quickly. But having read through it, I feel that the game mechanism itself isn't anything special. In fact, it's a little bit over elaborate, in my opinion. One of the things that I find with skirmish games is that you end up having to remember too many attributes and too many skills from one piece to another, and my brain doesn't really take it all in very well. So you have to play a lot of games with a group of figures and get used to all the various skills and attributes of those figures. And in this game, there are a hell of a lot of varieties of skills and so on, attributes that you can give to each figure. So I've got a feeling that's going to make it a little bit difficult to pick up from my point of view. But having said that, by doing that and by having a large number of suggested campaigns, suggested board table types that you can play on, everything from the typical villages and temples through to castles, abandoned temples, encampments, all that kind of thing, cities, towns. So you could play it anywhere from the mountainous forests in the north of Japan through to city streets like Tokyo or Kyoto, that kind of thing. And it's got a lot more in terms of, look at all this, flooded fields, earthquakes. These are all complications that you can add to the game. Various objectives, so it's got scenarios, so you can mix in a particular scenario, such as preventing your enemy from committing seppuku. So your aim is to stop him killing himself, otherwise he gains honour. And you can add a complication, such as it takes place in a sacred place, and play it in a forest or something like that. So the variations and permutations are endless. And then on top of that, you have various heroes that you can introduce, and you have some suggestions for various buntai. And these are far more elaborate than the various buntai that are suggested in Ronin. So it's a lot more sophisticated, but I've got a feeling it's going to be a little bit difficult to play. But anyway, I'm going to give it a go, see how I get on, and then give you a report on that. Okay, so before you start play, best thing to do is to go to the Daisho blog, because the game has got pretty good online web support. So the blog address is daishogame.wordpress.com, and you'll find a number of useful things on this site. There is a downloadable quick reference sheet, which is always worth having. Saves you having to keep referring to the book. And there is also, interestingly, a sort of converter, so it tells you what the equivalents are in the Daisho game of the Ronin box sets. So if you already have a Buntai to use for Ronin, you can immediately convert that into Daisho terms. And the most useful thing is a Excel spreadsheet, which is a points calculator, which allows you to either make up your own buntais or to draw up a sheet of the figures that you're going to use that you've taken out of one of the suggested buntai in the book, and then you can print that out and have it in front of you. So here's an example. This is my first buntai of 5 figures, and I've used a buntai described as the troubleshooters from the rulebook. Now, in what you get is a little menu, and you can pick figures from the buntai. So I've picked 2 sort of character figures and 3 generic Ronin. And that was partly because I didn't really want to overload myself with too many skills and attributes, that kind of thing. So I've only got 2 figures that have got anything special about them, and 3 figures that are just sort of generic Ronin. But I did find there were a few problems with this spreadsheet. I've got to admit, I'm not the most computer literate person in the world, and I do have trouble using spreadsheets, but I don't think it was just my ineptitude. That I don't think it actually works very well. It's over large, so you really have to shrink the page down in order to get something that you can print out on an A4 piece of paper. But on top of that, there are just little things that don't seem to be working right in it. For instance, off to the left of this
sheet here, you have a column that is multiple. So I would have thought that you could put in 3, say, in that column against the Bushi who are Ronin down the bottom there, and it would multiply the cost, but it doesn't. It doesn't seem to have any effect at all. So I couldn't find any purpose for that column being there. It's just taking up valuable space. And then under the key powers, there's actually an entry. There are lots of useful drop-down menus, so you don't have to type all these things in. You can just select them from the drop-down menu. But you can actually select key powers as a key power, which didn't make sense to me, and it actually adds to the points cost. And I've set the initial character up there, the leader, according to the skills and attributes that he's got in the book, and he comes out at 79 points. But if you notice, he's got a key value, KI that is, of 4, and he's only got 3 powers. He's only got 3 particular key powers, and yet if I were to add another one, then that would take him over the 79 points that he's got in the book. So I think there's a few things there to be ironed out. But you can't really do this on your own. It's a lot of mental arithmetic, so you do need some kind of calculator like this to help you. And I've got my doubts as to whether it's working correctly. But to give you, to read you from the book what it says about the figure cost. The figure cost is the karma cost plus the shooting value cost plus the fighting value cost plus the speed cost plus the armor cost plus the weapon costs plus the base movement rate cost plus skill costs plus key cost plus key power costs plus magical costs. So that's a lot to work out if you are going to give a character multiple weapons and a few skills to give him a little bit of characterization. It gets a little bit complicated. So you need it printed out in front of you, and you need something to help you add up the costs. And at the moment, this isn't a very tidy way of doing it. And as I say, I think there are some errors that have crept in there that need to be sorted out. Okay, so using those points calculators, I made up 2 Buntai, each of 5 figures. And the first Buntai were the troubleshooters, and this is the first character in it. He's the leader. This figure is actually by Zenit. It's part of their Kenzai range, and he is a Kenzai. But I've called him Mamatu Zaimon. And I haven't enhanced his abilities in any way. I'm using him straight from the book, so I'll just run through all the various skills and attributes that you have to take into account with each figure. He has a karma of 2+. Now your karma is basically the value that you have to beat when you're making a saving throw. You always use D10 in this game, so anything but a 1 is going to be all right on. Natural ones are automatic failures. If you roll a 2, then you're knocked down, but anything else, anything above 2, and you're fine. So he's fairly indestructible, although it has to be said that certain weapons do reduce your dice roll. So for instance, if you're hit by a Naginata, that's a deduction of 2 from your roll, so he would then only be he would have to roll 4 or higher if he was hit by a Naginata. So he's not as invincible as he appears at first sight, but he's quite a strong character. And he has a fighting value of 3. That means he adds 3 to the attack roll with whatever weapon he strikes with. He has a shooting value of 3 as well, although he's not actually armed with any shooting weapons, so that statistic is irrelevant really. And he has a speed of +1. Figures on foot move 6 inches, and then you add the speed to that, so he can move at a walk 7 inches. Okay, and then next he has this quality called Ki, Ki, and that has a value of 4. And what that means is that he's allowed once per phase on 4 different occasions to use one of these abilities here. And this is one of the things that confused me about the spreadsheet, that I would have thought that if you had a Ki of 4, you could have 4 qualities there. But if I add another Ki power to his attributes, it puts his price up above what it's got in the book. So I think the only answer is that he's got 3 Ki powers, and he can use them 4 times. So one of them he can use twice. But to give you an example of what the kind of things they do, the first Ki that you must have is second chance, and basically that allows you to re-roll an unsuccessful D10 roll whenever you want. So including if you rolled a natural 1, you could roll it again, but you always have to abide by the second roll. Then he has another Ki power called Whirlwind Attack, and that basically allows him to use his full fighting value against multiple opponents. If you're in a melee and you're faced by, say, 2 opponents, you would normally have to split your fighting value between the 2 of them. So his fighting value was 3, so he would be able to use 2 against one and 1 against the other. But on one occasion, he can use the full fighting value of 3 against all the opponents in melee. And then the other one, Ki power that he's got there, is Heroic Leap. And that basically allows him to move at a full run move and cross intervening obstacles, including other figures, walls, trees, hedges, that kind of thing, without any penalty. Now this takes me back to my point about the spreadsheet and how you do really need to have something printed out on a A4 piece of paper to keep track of this, because you have to tick off how many times you've used Ki. You can only use it 4 times, or this character can. But you can regain Ki by eliminating an enemy figure from the game. So there's a certain amount of bookkeeping, and you can't just do all this from memory. And then on top of that, he starts the game with 4 skills, and these skills are different from Ki powers in that he retains them throughout the game. So he doesn't get to use them just once, he can use them whenever the time is appropriate. So he has a leadership of +3. That basically just means that he adds 3 to the initiative roll. He's fearless. That means he's not influenced by terrifying creatures. He's inspirational. That means that any figure within 12 inches of him gains +1 to their karma roll. He's got lightning reflexes, which means that he can preempt a strike against him. So if his opponent has the initiative in a melee, he can still go first. And other than that, he doesn't have much else to use. I've not given him any armor, and that's because the figure isn't portrayed with armor, and they do recommend that you try to use figures so that what you see is what you get, in terms of the weapons they've got and the armor that they're wearing. So he's got ordinary clothes. That means he's got an armor value of 7, which means it's very easy to strike him. Basically, you've got to exceed or equal or exceed the armor value plus the speed. So he's got speed of 1, armor value of 7, which means you've got to equal 8 in your attack roll. And to the dice roll, you add the weapons value. So, for instance, a katana would be +3. You add the fighting value, and this chap's got a fighting value of 3. So you're already on 6 before you start. So he's easily struck, but then equally is easily saved because his karma is 2+. He only has the basic weapons. Samurai figures are obliged to follow the Daisho code, which means 2 swords, a long sword, the katana, and the short sword, the wakizashi, and that's all he's got. And he has no equipment. Equipment is things like grenades, a horse, that sort of thing. And he has no spells. I haven't given him any magical abilities either. But that gives you an idea. I mean, he is the most important character in the Buntai, but it gives you an idea of how many skills and attributes you have to keep tabs on. And that is only part of a vast selection. So there's a little bit of bookkeeping, but I do really like the intricacy of it. It makes it, my brain can't cope with it in terms of remembering everything, but at the same time it does allow you to really add a lot of character to your warband. Okay, the next character is called Yurata Hyondo, and as you can see, he's got a longbow, so a lot of his skills and key powers are related to shooting and to accuracy. But again, this is part of my point, that I'll show you all his attributes, but they're all things that you've got to have written down on a roster sheet. Really, you can't just keep track of all these things in your head, especially as key powers are spent and then can be regained and so on. And we're only on to the second figure. I mean, potentially you could have 15 figures in a warband, so my poor brain can't cope with it anyway. So nothing remarkable about these sort of basic values, other than to say that they are slightly different from the previous characters, so you do have to keep tabs on all these things. But this character has a key value of 3, and he has 3 key powers to match, so I am still a little bit confused by this. Can you use one key 3 times maybe and ignore the other 2? I'm not sure. It's something that could quickly be cleared up on a forum, but it puzzles me a little bit. But anyway, he's got some, as I say, key powers related to shooting. You have to have second chance, that's the same as the previous character, but he's got arrow storm, which allows him to shoot more than one figure at a time. Basically, he can split his shooting value between targets, and he's got another key power called pinpoint accuracy, which allows him to shoot into a melee and choose the target. Normally you'd have to randomize your target, and there's a risk of you hitting a friendly figure. And these are his skills, so these he can use whenever the time is appropriate. He doesn't have to ration them out. He's got close quarters shooting, and that allows him to use a two-handed ranged weapon, which is obviously going to be his bow, in melee. So he's very powerful in melee as well, because he can use the bow at short range. He's got another one which is Master and Teacher, and that allows him to add +1 to the value of a particular weapon which he has to designate at the beginning of the game, and obviously that's going to be his bow as well. And he's got Master Shot, which allows him to ignore the benefits of soft cover. So all in all, he's a very strong archer. And then, just as with the other character, I haven't given him any armor because he's not. The figure itself hasn't got any armor on. He's had to pay for the bow. That's cost him a little bit extra. And he's got no equipment and no spells, so I'm trying to keep it as simple as I can. And then to complete the Buntai, I've got 3 figures. They're all, I think these are Curtis figures. They're all taken from their 7 Samurai, and they're just basic Ronin. They're armed with the Daisho, and they have no armor, no key powers, no skills. So they're just to bolster the Buntai and shouldn't overcomplicate the game. But the one thing in retrospect that I would do for future games is give the characters armor, because the game turned out it was so easy to hit and so easy to save that you ended up just waiting for natural 1s and 10s to influence the game. So it's definitely a good idea to have some armor in there and add a few extra skills and key powers and so on. But you really do have to sort of build up slowly, because there's a lot to remember. Even though the mechanism is simple, there's a lot to absorb when you first play this game. Now, for the opposing Buntai, I chose to use the Sohai, the warrior monks. And I made a mistake at this point, because the first character on the list in the book is this chap who's called Kiyoshi, the Iron Wind. And I happen to have this figure which has the bow, which is not a longbow, the staff. And I thought he'd make a suitable leader, but in fact, although he's at the top of the list, he doesn't have the leadership skill. And one of the rules in the book says that you must have one figure with leadership. So I made that mistake, but in the event, it didn't make a big difference to the game. It meant that the Sohais usually lost the initiative, although they did have it on one occasion. So it didn't make a big difference to the game, in effect. But this chap, I won't go into all the attributes and skills and so on this side, other than to say that this chap had differing skills again, and was an interesting character to play. And then I had 2 monks armed with Naginata, and these guys, as well as Kiyoshi, have light armor. He does have some greaves on his shins and armor on his arms, but monks tended to wear their armor underneath the black cloak, so it's easy to portray them with armor. But light armor doesn't do very much anyway. It only adds 1 to their armor value. But the Naginata's a nasty weapon, because it reduces your karma roll if you're hit by 2, so it's quite an effective weapon. And 2 of these monks, the ones armed with Naginata, had the fanatic skill, which allowed them to re-roll their first failed karma test, so they could stay alive a little bit longer. And to finish off, there were 2 monks armed with longbows, and they aren't fanatics and they're not armored either, so They're just basically bog standard missile troops. Okay, so I wanted to keep my first game relatively simple. So I picked a scenario from the book called Assassination. And basically the objective is just to kill the leader of the opposing Buntai. So that reminded me a little bit of Saga, which I enjoy. I thought it'd be nice and simple. And for that, there's no defined way of setting the table up. So you then have to go to the setting up terrain section of the book, and I found that a little bit of a cop out in a way. They give you 3 different options for how to set the terrain up. Basically, you can either allow one player to set the terrain up, and then the other player can jiggle it about a little bit, or you can expend points so that each player spends a set number of points on terrain and then places them on the table, or you can just select one of the landscapes from the back of the book, and that's what they suggest. And I think that's probably the best way of doing it, but it does mean if you're playing a game where you're being a little bit competitive, one player is likely to gain an advantage from the terrain, because there are so many Buntai that do benefit from particular types of terrain. The Sohai monks, for instance, benefit from being around temples and sacred areas and so on. That's just one example. So nothing terribly complicated about the game I actually played. I just wanted to keep it simple, just to try out some of the mechanisms, get my head around the rules a little bit. So basically had 5 figures aside, and they came on the table in clusters like this, with the leader in the center, the object of the game being to kill the opponent's leader. I did notice straight away really that like Ronin, the rules aren't really suitable for solo play, and that's not a criticism of it. It's just it makes it awkward when you're trying to try the rules out on your own, because as soon as you know your opponent's intentions, it makes it a lot easier to know what to do yourself. So when you're playing against yourself, it sort of defeats half the object of the majority of the scenarios. But I do think that there is such a wealth of really interesting and well thought out scenarios in this book, that I'm drawn to it in preference to Ronin straight away, really. And I think that's partly the result of the Osprey philosophy, as it were. The books are all quite short and pithy. Some Osprey rules I really don't like. Most of them are decent enough rules, but Daisho goes much further. It's a much better game to play. So the first phase in every turn is to roll for initiative, and with a +3 to the dice roll for the troubleshooters, it was fairly inevitable they were going to win the initiative in each turn, and that happened with the first turn. The Sohai rolled 2 and the troubleshooters 3, so the troubleshooters have initiative in the first turn. And you move each piece in turn, so it's an I go, you go for the movement, and this is how the movement ended up. And then there's a shooting phase, so the bows exchanged fire. Because the troubleshooter's archer hadn't moved, he's at an advantage to hit, but it's so easy to roll hits anyway that both sides hit. Neither side inflicted a kill because the saving throws saved the archers on both sides. As I said earlier, one of the things I would do future games is to armor the figures, and that just makes the game a little bit more interesting because it makes it harder to hit, especially with missile fire. But then you have the option, if you have, take this example here where you have two archers, if they're within sight of one another and within range of the target, they can combine their fire in a sort of volley fire, and for each additional figure you add a +1 to hit roll. So you can adopt tactics to overcome armor, and it just makes the whole thing a little bit more interesting. But basically, this game that I played, just there was no subtlety in it at all. I just wanted to try the rules out, and the archers exchanged fire. Eventually, one of the Sohai archers was killed. The figures moved closer and closer towards one another, and a number of melees developed. The melees proved interesting in their own right. The same kind of syndrome, that it was hard to, it was easy to hit and easy to save the rolls. The character fighting in the red jacket there was knocked down at one point and managed to recover. But as I say, the game ended up relying on natural ones, and unfortunately the troubleshooter's leader was struck by the warrior monk with the naginata, and rolled a natural 1 and was therefore killed. That's the earlier figure being knocked down and recovering. When I say that the leader was killed, in fact, you shouldn't really use that expression, because the correct term in the rules is eliminated from the game, because after the game is over, you score up points. So you have objective points, and then you have points for eliminating opponents' figures according to their rank. But there's a chance you can revive the figure after the game is over, which opens up the possibilities of campaigns and so on. And that makes it a little bit more interesting as well. So the figure isn't necessarily killed, but he's certainly out of the combat. And then at the end of the game, there's a chance that he does recover. But if the scenario has ended with the opposition in control of the field, then he is taken prisoner. So he's still lost to you for campaign purposes. But he then has the option of committing seppuku. So the game goes on after the game is finished, and it has got all these really nice scenarios for campaigns, and the whole as I say, the whole thing opens up in a way that Ronin doesn't. It goes places. So final remarks then. Well, it's definitely a really good set of rules. I can highly recommend them. It's well produced. The photographs in it are superb. The rule mechanism is fairly simple to pick up. The complications arise with the sheer number of skills and key powers and varying attributes that you can get within it. So I think at the end of the day, that makes it a little bit difficult to pick up, but it's worth persevering with, because it does give far more depth to the game than Ronin has. The really nice thing is that you can, if you have figures that you're using for Ronin, you can transfer them across easily. And of course, the opposite applies, that this set of rules, Daisho, is so rich in scenarios and different little complications and things that you can add to the game, such as earthquakes and so on, that you could transfer those back to Ronin. So the two things are sort of interchangeable in a way. They complement one another. But personally, I think I'm now drawn into the Daisho camp. I think they're going to go places that Ronin can't go. But that does make me wonder why they haven't emphasised their great strength in the rule book. The obvious sort of elephant in the room is really why didn't they have more photographs of mythical creatures and so on in there? I mean, they're out there on the market. There's all these Kenzai figures that seem to be tailor-made for this set of rules, and they haven't mentioned them, they haven't photographed them. And I'm now going to get my figures out of the boxes and start painting them and use them with these rules, and it opens up a whole new area to play in without having to invest too heavily in new figures. I would definitely like to see some kind of improvement in the spreadsheets. That there needs to be a simplified way of drawing up a roster of your Buntai and having the all the attributes and skills and so on available, so you can see them at a glance. Because once you get up to a Buntai of a dozen or so figures, and you have given them a little bit of character and colour and varied their weapons, you do really need to keep track of that, and also whether or not they have spent their key powers or gained back any by eliminating figures from the game. And at the moment, the best you can do is select a print area from the spreadsheet that they give you on their website, and print that out. And it's a little bit messy. Possibly even have cards, so have one card per figure, a blank sort of generic card that you can fill in, maybe even print a photograph of your figure onto it, and then have an area underneath that, so you can laminate it and then write over it, and do it that way. But I think it needs something in that area. But all in all, a really good set of rules, and a lot of imagination put into it, especially in the creation of the scenarios. There are some really imaginative scenarios, such as escaping an imminent tsunami into a stone tower, trying to prevent an enemy warlord from committing seppuku so that he doesn't gain any honor from it, trying to be the first person to get a bride to a wedding. Lots of things like that. They've really put a lot of thought and creativity into it, and I really like it. So I'm looking forward to playing this game in the future. So there we go. The game is called Daisho, Skirmish Warfare in Mythical Japan, and it's available from North Star, price $14.95, and it's well worth checking out. Even if you're never going to play it, it's worth having for the photographs and for the scenarios and so on. It would really enhance your enjoyment of Ronin, even if you didn't intend to play these rules. Hope you found that useful, and I'll see you on the next video.